Eccoci qui, siamo qui col direttore del Siena College Research Institute, Don Levy. Don Levy, Mr. Levy, thank you very much for being with us once again.
It's a pleasure. Thank you very much for having me.
So the elections are just a few weeks away, 4 weeks from yesterday, actually. But let's take a step back. Last year, you released a poll in which Trump was leading Biden by a wide margins in 5 of the 6 key states. In the same poll, however, a generic Democratic candidate was in the lead in all those 6 states. According to your polls now, Harris is performing much worse in all the 6 states, and she's trailing Trump in 3 of them. Has something changed from last year? Or maybe Harris is not the generic Democratic candidate people were waiting or hoping for?
Well, certainly everything changed when Biden left the race and Harris became the candidate. We saw, if you look at our polls in the battleground states, right after Harris joined the race, she picked up between about 4 and as many as 12 points relative to where Biden had been across those states. It was an entirely new race as soon as Harris jumped in. She had tremendous momentum around the Democratic convention, but that momentum seemed to stall a bit. And right now, the race in most of these battleground states is quite close. We're showing in Arizona and in Georgia, Trump with meaningful leads, a small lead in North Carolina, although I'd consider that a toss-up, and Harris holding on to very small, essentially statistically insignificant leads, but leads nonetheless across the 3 blue wall states in the northern part of the United States. And interestingly, the one lone electoral vote in Nebraska, the area of Omaha, Nebraska, is decidedly in Harris's favor. So right now, the arithmetic is that if Harris indeed carries the 1 vote in Nebraska and hangs on to the very small razor-thin leads that she enjoys in Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, that even if former President Trump prevails, not only in Georgia and Arizona, states he currently has advantages in, but holds on in North Carolina and in Nevada, then the vote count in the Electoral College would be 270 for Harris, 268 for Trump. That's how close the race is at this point in time.
That will be an interesting result. We'll see how it goes. But let's talk about the Sun Belt. You already mentioned some of the states, and according to your polls, Trump is ahead, as you said, in Arizona, Georgia, North Carolina. You said it's a toss-up, and Nevada as well. Why do you think Trump is performing so well in the Sun Belt? How do you explain his improvement between Hispanics and African American, if there is one?
Well, certainly, I think that he has improved amongst Hispanic voters. That's a group of voters that, you would be doing yourself a disservice if you thought of all Hispanics as a homogenous group of people. Tremendous variation amongst Hispanics in not only Arizona, Nevada, but also across other states like North Carolina, even Florida as well. What we've seen is a group of voters who 10 years ago, 12 years ago, were voting heavily Democratic, are now still voting somewhat Democratic, but only in the neighborhood of between 16 and 24 points in favor of the Democratic candidate, Kamala Harris. What are some of the issues? Some of the issues are in terms of many Hispanics now over time have moved away from Catholicism and moved towards being more evangelical, and evangelical Hispanics are tending to prefer Trump to Harris. Also, the general economic tone of the United States and the perception of the economy amongst Hispanics is driving more and more younger Hispanics, Hispanic men, to be backers of Trump and move away from the more traditional Democratic basis. So Harris enjoys a sizable lead in the poll that we just released yesterday, a 24-point lead nationally among Hispanics. But that is a group of people that really the Harris campaign would be far more comfortable if that lead were more significant than 24 points.
Now, you talked about the blue wall, so let's go to the Rust Belt. Harris, according to your latest polls, is leading in Pennsylvania, for example, improving Biden's 2020 results. Has Trump lost appeal among white working class in the Rust Belt?
Boy, it's hard to say that he's lost appeal amongst that group of people. Our numbers in general have Trump up about 2 to 1 amongst white voters without a college education. You look at some of the recent developments, for example, the Teamsters Union, the firefighters unions deciding not to endorse a candidate, despite the fact that Biden and Harris define themselves as so adamantly pro-labor. Still, the rank and file, many of whom are white voters without a college degree, just simply ideologically, culturally prefer Trump to Harris. Consequently, they didn't endorse. What the key to those states are really going to be is coming down to turnout. I think that we will see white working class voters, white voters in general, continuing to side with Trump. So the question is there's a few different questions. Number one is to try to anticipate the black turnout. We see in our poll, Harris has returned to drawing approximately 80% of the African American vote across the northern states. That's a dramatic advantage in polling. The question is, will black voters in cities like Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, Milwaukee, Detroit, will they turn out at rates that will provide Harris with sufficient impetus to hold on to the razor-thin polling lead that she enjoys? Also, I think we have to talk about the gender divide. Tremendous gender divide, men leaning towards Trump by, in many cases, about a dozen points. Women, conversely, preferring Harris by a similar margin. And especially when you look at the younger men and women, young women under the age of 35. I don't know what they talk about when they have dinner together, but they certainly have radically different political views. Young women strongly in Harris's camp. In many cases, when you just look at young women, Harris's numbers top well over 60% amongst that group. Trump counteracts that to a large degree amongst young men. Different perceptions of not only relative to abortion, but also gender equity, for example. We asked whether voters thought that women still face the same obstacles to success as do men. Young women overwhelmingly say, yes, we do. Young men say, no, you don't. So the candidates really have, not only are they disparate on the issue of abortion, disparate on issues relative to the economy and immigration, but on this fundamental issue of gender equity, there's a real difference between the two campaigns. And young women at this point strongly with Harris, young men perhaps clinging to a sort of hyper masculinity that Donald Trump represents and enacts, continuing to prefer Trump to Harris.
Now, let's talk about the difference between the national popular vote versus the electoral college. We know that winning the national popular vote doesn't mean that you actually winning the presidency. We've seen it in 2016. But your polls show that the national popular vote is basically tied. But Harris has a lead in enough states to win the electoral college, even by a very slim margin. You said it earlier, 270 versus 268. Considering that Biden barely won in 2020 despite a 4.5% margin in the national popular vote, is something changing in the balance of the electoral college? Could this also depend on Trump gaining voters in strongly Democratic states like New York and California? And if so, why?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that what we're seeing is that to a large degree, the rule of thumb was that Democrats need to win by about 4 points or more in order to win the Electoral College. As you point out, our September polls showed virtually a tie. The poll that we released yesterday actually has Harris now regaining a lead of about 3.5 points nationally. Still, what has really changed is in states like New York, my home state, which Joe Biden carried by 23 points. Our most recent polling here in New York has Harris up by about 13 points. No danger that Harris is going to lose New York, but a 10-point change is certainly significant. Why? What has happened? What we're seeing is that issues relative to the economy, immigration, and crime have moved centrist voters, independents, more so into the Republican column than into the Democratic column. Also, in a couple of these states that you mentioned, not only New York, but states like California, Illinois, New Jersey, Washington State, Oregon, those are states that abortion doesn't seem to be threatened. Abortion is a rallying issue for many Democrats across redder or more purplish states, but in the deep blue states, it doesn't really bring voters out to the same degree. And there are voters who say, I'm for returning to Roe v. Wade. I think that abortion should be mostly or always legal, but based on issues like the economy, the perceived threat of crime, their view that the current administration has failed in terms of handling the influx of migrants to the United States, are pro-abortion but pro-Trump. And we've seen in these deep blue states a migration of some of the soft Democratic vote over to Trump. Consequently, the national popular vote has tightened up, yet across the battleground states, most especially these blue wall states that I think we're all going to be talking about even in our sleep, Harris has held on to that small advantage. And she's also sort of closed the gap in a couple of states where abortion is or has been on the ballot. Interestingly, even in a state like Florida, which doesn't appear likely to be a Democratic pickup, with the abortion amendment on the ballot, it's fair to assume that Harris will do slightly better there than if that initiative were not on the ballot.
Now, this is a question from our followers. How do you explain that unions and blue collars are now looking at Trump as a viable option despite his anti-union and pro-corporate views? Why are they drawn towards Trump?
Well, I think that union leadership, I think, recognizes that Harris and the Biden-Harris administration are decidedly pro-labor. However, the rank and file, who tend to be, as we were talking about earlier, white working class voters, they are culturally drawn to Trump. They believe that he represents their interest. They think that when Trump was in office, they personally, people like them, did better economically. And right now, it is striking that whether they be union members or white working class people who are not necessarily in a union, are deeply troubled by the American economy. At rates approaching 75 to 80%, they say the American economy is functioning no better than fair or poor. They are concerned about their own personal economic well-being, and they see Trump, despite some of his initiatives being seen as anti-labor, they see him as more understanding of their economic plight, and they believe, certainly as Trump sees to remind them again and again, that they were doing better financially during the Trump administration before the pandemic than they are today. So it's a cultural appeal as well as an economic appeal. And I think that the issue of immigration has resonated with some rank and file union members who feel as though there is some truth in their opinion to Trump's argument that migrants coming to the United States may very well take some of the jobs currently enjoyed by working class Americans, union Americans. Now, as far as tariffs are concerned, Trump has, quite resolutely said that if he takes office again here in January, he will be imposing severe tariffs on many foreign goods entering the United States, despite the fact that some economists say that that will result in actually a tax on Americans who seek to buy those goods, as much as $4,000 a year for an average American family. Still, some union workers feel as though that would be the type of support that they ultimately would redound to them, would safeguard their jobs, and would ultimately enhance demand for American-made products. So there are a number of reasons why these union workers, despite the fact that Trump at times has been anti-union, that they personally feel more aligned with Donald Trump culturally, and they believe economically he may very well serve their interests more so than a Democratic president.
Now, I have a question about the methodology of the polls, but as pollsters ourselves, well, we always like to remind our viewers, polls just take a picture of the present. They don't foresee the future. So just having that said, how have you changed your methodology compared to 4 years ago to account for the differences between polls and actual results in key states in 2020, and not to repeat any possible mistakes that might have been done?
Well, sure. We are a snapshot in time, and we seek to generate a representative sample of whether it be the nation or the individual states that we're speaking about. A couple of things that we have changed or enhanced is now we found that in 2020, we had a significant number of respondents who we reached by phone. Remember, we are a telephone shop. We call every one of our respondents up on the phone, overwhelmingly cell phones, but a significant percentage of respondents would answer the phone. We'd say, "Hi, this is Don calling from Siena to conduct the poll," and they would yell at us, "Trump," and hang up. Because they didn't complete the entire interview, they didn't count in our ultimate polling estimate. We changed the order in which we asked the questions a bit. We asked the horse race question right up off the top. And now if someone answers that question but doesn't answer the balance of the poll, they count, and we do a progressive weighting where we weight twice, but those partial completes count now. We found that had we included those anecdotally more Trump respondents who terminated the call early in 2020, it would have moved our estimate about 1.5 points from where we ended up being. We, as well as many of our colleagues, all had error in the Biden direction of between 3.5 and 5 points. So it would have solved about 1/3 to 40% of the error that we had in 2020. So that's one change. We included the partials. The second thing we did, we went back and we, of course, looked at our results. We found that the most areas that were prone to error were not areas where Biden did well, but rather areas where Trump did well. So the areas that had the highest percentage concentration of Trump voters were areas where, despite getting a representative sample of people by age, by race and ethnicity, by education, we simply got a few too many Biden backers because the Trump voters apparently were less willing to participate in polls than were Biden voters in 2020. So we have stratified our sample. We include a greater density of voters who we model to be likely Trump voters in those areas that we know Trump will continue to carry. And so we seek to up the probability that those voters will be in our sample. So those are two of the things that we did. We also now are informed by the results by region that we have at our fingertips. So we know, for example, in an area of central Pennsylvania, that Trump carried many of those counties by 45 to 50 points. So we review our data as it comes in and compare that to past results. We don't weight our results by previous vote choice, but we certainly review our totals to take a look to see whether we think there's any question that we may have threats to our reliability. So those three things: we review current polling compared to previous, we stratify our sample so as to generate a greater probability that right of center voters will be in our sample, and we include partial interviews now in our estimates in these battleground states.
Now, the last question, which is very tricky. Yesterday, of course, you released a poll, a new poll. But if the elections were to be held today, who do you think will win the presidential election and why? In which states or how?
Well, I'm not really in the prediction business. We're in the polling business. It is razor thin, and right now according to our polls, this thing could go either way. When you're talking about leads of 1, 2, 3 points, it's well within the margin of error, and is really going to be determined by which group of voters. You have to, when you look at our polls, you look at the cross tabulation, our polls, you see dramatic differences. So when you see black voters voting at telling us that they're going to vote for Harris at rates of approximately 80%, voters who are white, no college, saying they're going to vote for Trump at rates of 60 to 66%. It really comes down to which of those groups of people turn out at a rate somewhat greater or less than how we have modeled the electorate. Events like the hurricane in North Carolina, for example, could be really consequential. That hurricane hit a Democratic stronghold of Asheville, but many of the rural areas that will no doubt be Trump strongholds were affected by the hurricane to the point where the actual voting place was damaged. So little things like that add up, affecting turnout. We also have to watch these last 4 weeks of the campaign and see to what degree does one party or the other generate slightly more enthusiasm. The Trump people are defining the race now as a battle between good and evil. They're certainly trying to call to their backers to say, this is the most consequential election of your lifetime. You must vote. Certainly the Democrats are doing a similar pitch, and they're having their top surrogates, including former President Barack Obama, out on the campaign trail, trying to drum up whatever support. We even saw Bruce Springsteen making an endorsement of Harris. So we're really coming down to a turnout race. I think that what is unique about the polling in this cycle is how, whether it's the New York Times Siena poll, we're a phone shop, or other folks, CNN, who does a hybrid methodology, other pollsters who go strictly online, that all of us really are defining an electorate that is razor thin, yet highly bifurcated. So when you add it all up, America is a divided nation, but we are extremely divided depending on your age, your education, your race, and ethnicity. And at this point in time, it's really too close to call. Every single one of these 7 battleground states could go either way, despite Trump having the largest lead of the 7 in those 2 states of Arizona and Georgia. Yet each of those 7 could go either way. So, you could end up seeing a landslide in the Electoral College one way or the other. The popular vote right now is sort of coalescing around about a 3-point advantage for Harris. Maybe that grows a bit to 4 points, similar to where Biden was. But we're going to be down to in the tens of thousands of votes, quite possibly deciding the election across many of these 7 key battleground states.
4 weeks to go. Anything can happen. Mr. Levy, thank you very much for your availability. Thank you very much for all the insights. It was very, very interesting and very helpful. And we'll see what happens in the next 4 weeks and on the 5th of November. Thank you again.
Grazie.